Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1404, the beginning of our 27th year of This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARRL Board of Directors approves funding for federal advocacy, creates a new DXC single-band honor roll, and elects officers. Vandals strike an amateur radio manufacturing facility. We will tell you about it. Damage to Taiwanese undersea cables sparks a lot of interest in amateur radio for internet and communications. NASA rolls the Artemis II spacecraft out to the launch pad. Amateurs in Belarus are arrested under suspicion of espionage. The FCC is taken to the Supreme Court to justify its ability to issue fines. The Hubble Space Telescope is nearing the end of its life. Nominations are now being sought for the 2026 Dayton Hamvention Awards. U.S. lawmakers have agreed to restore funding to the Voice of America. NASA celebrates 50 years of the GOES satellites. New 60-meter frequencies become available in early February. The FCC is poised to exempt U.S. amateurs from foreign adversary reporting requirements. An amateur radio geostationary satellite is proposed for station keeping over North America. And an annual Hindu pilgrimage is kept safe by amateur radio operators. We will have this story and a lot more coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT on what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio presents Part 5 of his series on building a shack. In this week's episode, Onno tackles the problem of noise. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, will be here with yet another edition of Dead Electrical Dudes. This week's stiff is Guglielmo Marconi, and we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all of the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, begins its 27th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, where the entire state is awaiting Snowmageddon 2026, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from Cortlandville, New York, where my ham shack has been converted into a pantry because of the impending storm. It's filled with toilet paper and bread and milk and eggs and cheese. Oh my! I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from a very cold studio in Sandwich, Illinois, where -5 currently feels like -25, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
Reporting from our studio in Bradenton, Florida, where it's 76 degrees warmer than it is in my home in Illinois, I'm Mike Nicolich, KD9DXM.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're all getting ready for a big snowstorm, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting while awaiting for the next blizzard from the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. We're expecting 18-plus inches of snow. It's a good thing I live next door to a person who owns a large bucket loader. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're on the weather roller coaster of temps. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off the news this week, A member bulletin emailed to ARRL members included highlights from the annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors, held in Windsor, Connecticut, January 16th and 17th, 2026. With more on the annual meeting, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this special report.
ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, who was reelected, led the meeting and welcomed new division vice directors, including Carol Miazzo, KP4MD Pacific, Marty Newington, AG3L Atlantic, Mel Parkus, NM7P Rocky Mountain, and John Kitchens, NS6X Southwestern. Also elected were First Vice President Kristen McIntyre, K6WX, and International Affairs Vice President Rod Stafford, W6ROD. ARRL Foundation Treasurer Rick Neiswander, K7GM, was also elected as ARRL Second Vice President, succeeding Mike Ritz, W7VO, who held that position since 2024 and resigned on December 31st, 2025. The board also reelected David Minster, NA2AA, as Chief Executive Officer, and Secretary Diane Middleton, W2DLM, as Chief Financial Officer. Board committees met the day before. The Administration and Finance Committee approved the 2026 plan, later approved unanimously by the board, amending it to include additional funding for advocacy efforts in Washington, D.C. These efforts include continuing work to advance the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act through committee and towards final passage. ARRL launched a nationwide grassroots campaign last September aimed at securing passage of the bipartisan federal legislation that would grant amateur radio operators the same rights to install antennas on their property as those enjoyed by users of TV antennas, wireless internet, and flagpoles. The complete minutes of the 2026 annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be available soon on the ARRL website. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Board members discussed the final report from the Election Review Committee that was formed at the board's second meeting in July of 2022. They also heard a report from ARRL Foundation President David Norris, K5UZ, highlighting the foundation's philanthropic support of amateur radio. In 2025, the foundation awarded 171 scholarships, totaling approximately $800,000, made possible through the generosity of the private foundation, amateur radio, digital communications, individuals, and radio clubs. The foundation also awarded 35 grants totaling $60,580 and 2 division convention grants totaling $13,264. Several other actions advanced by committees included the creation of a new single-band DXCC, DX Century Club Honor Roll Award for qualifying operators. Commitments were also made to evaluate standardized reporting processes to streamline Section Traffic Manager and Amateur Radio Emergency Service monthly reporting, including broader adoption of the new Form 4 to improve the accuracy of reported volunteer hours. The complete minutes of the 2026 annual meeting of the ARRL Board of Directors will be available soon on the ARRL website. The next meeting is scheduled for July 17th and 18th of 2027.
A major act of vandalism has disrupted production and shipping at the Dishtronics, Tentec, and Alpha RF Systems factory in Dayton, Ohio. According to company owner Mike Dishop, N8WFF, a group of thieves last month destroyed the factory's underground electrical infrastructure in order to steal the copper cable. The thieves extracted approximately 2,000 feet of half-inch copper cable weighing approximately 2,800 pounds, explained Dishop, with an estimated salvage value of $12,000 and a replacement cost of over $35,000. Dishop told the ARRL that power was restored on January 14th, a month after the break-in, but explained that this interruption has impacted the timing for everything we had on schedule by at least 3 months due to loss of time and capital. He says the police investigation is ongoing. In 2016, ARRL reported that Dishtronics had purchased the assets of amateur radio equipment manufacturer Tentec.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Determined to preserve Taiwan's citizens' ability to communicate despite ongoing damage to underwater internet cables, many Taiwanese are pursuing the wireless option of amateur radio. Here's the story. Last summer, a court in Taiwan gave a 3-year prison sentence to the Chinese captain of a ship registered in Togo after he was convicted of deliberately damaging Taiwan's underwater cables. Though that high-profile case in the justice system appeared to settle one incident, Taiwan remains challenged by such ongoing damage, which cuts the island off from the rest of the world. Taiwan is also embroiled in ongoing tensions with Beijing, which claims the self-ruled territory as its own. Recent media reports say that amateur radio is being seen as Taiwan's wireless workaround to maintaining connectivity. A civil defense group there has been providing ham radio instruction to prepare candidates for their operating licenses. Although there is already an amateur radio presence in Taiwan, represented by the Chinese Taipei Amateur Radio League, these newest candidates are pursuing license status, especially because of the damage being done to the cables. Their hope is to be able to step in and maintain communications if Taiwan is cut off from the internet. More than 90% of Taiwan's internet traffic is carried by 15 international and 10 domestic communication cables.
NASA's Artemis II mission begins its long-awaited journey to the moon and back on Saturday, January 17, with the rocket's rollout on the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. 3 of the 4 astronauts who will be aboard have their amateur radio licenses. If all goes well, astronauts Reed Wiseman, KF-5LKT, Victor Glover, KI-5BKC, Jeremy Hansen, KF-5LKU, and Christina Koch will be poised for liftoff as early as February on the Artemis II test flight. Although the crew won't be touching down on the moon's surface, the test flight's 10-day journey will establish a path for eventual longer human presence on the moon. In fact, it will be a springboard, in a manner of speaking, to send the first NASA astronaut to Mars. By the time the quartet splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, their journey will have taken them the farthest from the Earth that any crewed mission has ventured. This will be the first human spaceflight to the moon in more than 50 years. Last year, the U.S. Space Agency asked hams with necessary capabilities to observe the Doppler shift on the spacecraft's S-band return link carrier signal. The spacecraft's S-band range is between 2200 and 2290 megahertz. Volunteers will not be transmitting or uplinking signals.
Authorities in Belarus have arrested a group of amateur radio operators on accusations of espionage and treason in a case that has alarmed the global ham radio community. State media claims the operators were part of a network of more than 50 people intercepting state secrets and spying on government aircraft movements, offenses that could carry penalties up to life imprisonment or the death penalty under Belarusian law. Officials say more than 500 pieces of radio equipment were seized and several of the detainees were shown on television, issuing what observers describe as coerced confessions. Amateur radio enthusiasts and experts dispute the allegations, noting that the low-cost handheld radios and consumer-grade software-defined receivers cited by the state media are incapable of cracking modern encrypted government communications. A Belarusian operator posting an online plea from Belarus said over 50 licensed hams have been detained and accused the government of turning a benign technical hobby into a fabricated spy scandal to justify a broader crackdown on independent, technically skilled citizens. Human rights group Vyasna reports that detainees are being held under strict secrecy, deepening fears that the case will be used to intimidate civil society and silence one of the country's last relatively open channels of communications.
A bipartisan agreement among lawmakers in the United States could restore the government's financial support of Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and other federally funded news services. The U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C., has reached a deal that would fund the Voice of America, giving its parent organization, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, an estimated $653 million. That figure is considerably lower than the annual $860 million provided previously to the agency. As described on the Radio World website, the funds would also pay for restoration of operations for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Radio Free Asia. A minimum of $30 million is earmarked for medium and shortwave programming by the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. The deal is part of a larger spending bill, the National Security Department of State and Related Programs Appropriations Act. It has the support of both parties in Congress, and its funding plan goes against the White House's executive order from last year, which shut the international news services down. Even if the measure receives final approval from the House and Senate, it will still require the president's signature.
The new 60-meter frequencies approved by the FCC in December will become available to amateurs as of February 13th, 2026, along with the new power restrictions on those frequencies. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here to tell us all the details you need to know.
It's a bit confusing as different rules apply to different segments of the band. The changes result from the FCC's action to approve a worldwide 60-meter amateur allocation made by the World Radio Communication Conference in 2015. As of February 13th, FCC-licensed amateur operators holding general class or higher licenses may operate on a secondary basis anywhere between 5351.5 and 53.66.5 kHz, subject to maximum bandwidth of 2.8 kHz and maximum transmit power of 9.15 watts ERP. Here's the confusing part. The existing 60-meter channels centered on 5332, 5348, 5373, and 5405 kHz remain as secondary amateur allocations with maximum power of 100 watts ERP. However, the old channel at 5358.5 kHz is eliminated, as it is now part of the new 5351 to 5366.5 kHz subband and subject to the lower power limit. For all 60-meter transmissions, emission bandwidth is limited to 2.8 kHz or less, and amateurs must not cause harmful interference to and must accept interference from stations authorized by the United States, NTIA, and FCC, and other nations in the fixed service, and all other nations in the mobile service except for aeronautical mobile. Data or radio emissions in particular must be limited to transmission links so as not to cause harmful interference. Digital mode operators must be familiar with offsets in order to stay within the authorized frequencies. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
For the purpose of computing ERP, the transmitter peak envelope power is multiplied by the antenna gain relative to a half-wave dipole antenna. A half-wave dipole is presumed to have a gain of 1 or 0 dBd. Amateurs using other antennas must maintain their station's records, either the antenna's manufacturing data on the antenna gain or calculations of the antenna gain. Once again, the new FCC rules take effect on February 13th, which is 30 days after publication in the January 14th edition of the Federal Register.
At the urging of the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, the Federal Communications Commission is expected to exempt radio amateurs from foreign adversary reporting requirements. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here to fill us in with all the details.
These rules would have applied to citizens of the listed countries, including those living in the United States, who hold or are applying for an FCC license. On January 8, 2026, the FCC released a draft report and order, that's an RNO, expected to be adopted at its January 29th meeting that will, as requested by ARRL, exempt radio amateurs from requirements that would have applied reporting requirements to every FCC-authorized radio amateur, subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a foreign adversary. This included any individual, wherever located, who is a citizen of a foreign adversary or country controlled by a foreign adversary, and it is not a United States citizen or permanent residents of the United States. Foreign adversaries are defined in the draft RNO as China, including Hong Kong and Macau, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russian Federation, and Venezuelan politician Nicolas Maduro. The draft liberally cites ARRL's comments agreeing that the nature of the amateur radio communication, as well as other individually licensed radio services, poses minimal risk to public communications networks that can drain the Commission personnel and resources to process the collection and attestations for each individual license would go far outweigh the benefit of the public or the agency doing so. You can read more at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Commission went on to say that we agree with the National Association for Amateur Radio, the ARRL, that while there is a need to protect national security where entities are engaged in commerce by providing networks, services, or equipment to the American public, where there is a possibility of sensitive information being surreptitiously accessed. As ARRL notes, amateur radio licensees not only do not sell or provide any communication service, network, or equipment to the public, but in fact they are prohibited from doing so by both international and domestic law. The risk to national security of foreign adversary control over these licenses is minimal due to the lack of connection to any of the nation's communications network used by the public. We also agree with the ARRL that this reasoning applies to similar services where licenses are held by individuals, like GMRS, and commercial radio operators, as well as other licenses and authorizations that lack sufficient connection to commercial wireless communication networks in the United States. Furthermore, the personal radio services, a category that encompasses over 1.6 million unique, mostly individual licensees, operate in shared spectrum bands for hobbyist and safety purposes, posing little threat to national security. Similarly, we include antenna structure owners that voluntarily register their towers in Schedule C because they are likely to be individuals or companies that lack sufficient connection to commercial communications networks. Given the sheer number of licensees and authorization holders in this group, the drain on commission personnel and resources to process the collections and attestations for each individual licensee would far outweigh the little benefit to the public or the agency of doing so.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Now shipping is the 2026 edition of the ARRL Repeater Directory, and it features over 22,000 listings powered by Repeater Book. New for 2026 is a City Quick Find Index, making it faster and easier than ever to locate nearby repeaters. Each year, the ARRL Repeater Directory continues to set the standard for trusted repeater information, and we're proud to see Repeater Book data play an ongoing role in that effort, said Garrett Dow, KD6KBC of Repeater Book. Our continued partnership helps ensure the directory reflects the most current, carefully curated repeater listings available. You can order the ARRL Repeater Directory from the ARRL online store or through an ARRL publication dealer.
ARRL Northwestern Division Director Mark Tharp, KB7HDX, has received the Hall of Honor Award for 35 years of service in the Yakima Search and Rescue Group. With more details on this award, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report.
Tharp called the award unexpected and very appreciated, adding, "You don't do volunteer work to get awards. You do it because it's needed and makes a difference." Tharp was first licensed in 1989 and now holds an extra class license. He became a ham after spending time with a ham friend while exploring the mountains in northwestern United States. The Yakima Search and Rescue Group continues to grow and help volunteers train and keep over 100 sports-related locations safe, said Tharp. He remembered one particular rescue that involved a young boy and his cat. The boy had been missing for several hours, and it was getting dark and cloudy. "We were tired, but we didn't quit. I sat down on a hillside, and using an infrared camera, we were able to find him and his cat. Cold, but okay," lamented Tharp. Tharp is retired now, but as the ARRL Northwestern Division Director, he represents amateur radio operators in Alaska, Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. He is a life member of ARRL and a member of the ARRL Diamond Club and the ARRL Maximum Society. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Meanwhile, amateur radio has taken ARRL member Brad Howard, PhD, KE8SVT, in many different directions. But last year, he stepped back a little to navigate a new direction, emergency medical technician. John Ross, KD8IDJ, returns with more.
It was not unfamiliar territory, though. In 1985, Brad was first certified as an EMT and began working for a private ambulance company, but the long hours and low pay eventually gave way to earning a doctorate in engineering management and an amateur radio license. He's been active in amateur radio emergency service, ARES, for many years and now sits on the board of directors of the Central Ohio Severe Weather Network. But why the change now back to EMT? For Aries, I've worked alongside many events, from marathons to meetings over the years. Working with EMTs and paramedics, it's hard to work sometimes for a long race, and I'm alone in the field, he said. I've noticed that there are times when medical care is critically needed, and needed fast. Now, as a certified EMT, I can help until more medical personnel and equipment arrive at the scene. Being ready to help when needed also applies to amateur radio, of course. It was a connection and a good reason to do both. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Today, Howard is still supporting Aries events, helping with severe weather situations and volunteering for FAST, the Red Cross First Aid Services team. As he nears retirement, amateur radio will always be an integral part of his life. For other hams who may be considering making changes, Howard says keep moving forward. Retirement or life changes don't mean you're done. Make it a whole life experience, make it count, and be ready when needed.
A new web-based tool for the amateur radio community, SpottedHam.com. It is launched to provide hams with a more granular way to monitor the bands. Unlike traditional clusters, Spotted Ham allows users to create custom watch lists for specific call signs, parks on the air references, or specific bands and modes. The system monitors live spotting data and sends an immediate email notification to the user the moment a match is found. This is particularly useful for operators chasing specific park references or monitoring the activity of friends and local club members. Developer Robert Campbell, KM6HBH, designed the tool to be mobile first, ensuring that activators in the field and operators in the shack have a clean, clutter-free interface. The service is currently free to use and supports global spotting data, including United Kingdom and European parks on the air references. Interested operators can find the live spotting table, an easy way to spot themselves, and sign up for alerts at www.SpottedHam.com.
A short window of time remains to nominate candidates for this year's awards to be presented at Hamvention. The categories are Amateur Radio Club of the Year, Amateur Radio Operator of the Year, and the Technical Achievement and Special Achievement Awards. The Club of the Year award honor organizations that demonstrate commitment to their community and the society. The Operator of the Year acknowledges active amateurs who are also active contributors to the amateur community at large and its future. The Technical Achievement Award recognizes hams whose inventions, experiments, and other related accomplishments have improved ham radio, and the Special Achievement Award honors an individual who has shown over the years a commitment to professionalism, service, and advancement of ham radio in general. Nomination forms can be found at the Hamvention website at hamvention.org. You'll also find details about supporting documentation that is required. The nomination period closes on February 10.
You might not know it, but plans are currently in progress to launch a geostationary amateur radio satellite that would provide multi-mode communications coverage to Europe and most of North America. Led by ESA and AMSAT DL, the project is currently called Future Geo and would be the pinnacle of achievement for the amateur radio hobby. Future Geo is likely to be very similar to the QO100 satellite that covers Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and a large portion of Asia. The major difference, of course, would be the inclusion of North America within Future Geo's footprint, opening up geostationary satellite operators to one of the largest ham radio populations in the world. What makes Future Geo so compelling is the showcase of modern radio and software technology, as well as the relatively low barrier to entry to satellite communication. Like QO100, Future Geo may feature analog and digital transponders, as well as a fully integrated software-defined radio stack. What that opens up is every existing ham radio mode, analog and digital, utilized through an easily accessible stationary satellite. Beyond typical ham radio activity, QO100 supports high-definition video nets through the use of amateur digital television. Wideband digital transponders open up the possibility of great experimentation from hams with a strong technical and especially software-focused background. Imagine receiving amateur radio television with similar ease to that of DirecTV or Starlink. Access to the technology is achievable. Everything required to access future GEO from your own backyard can be possible for about the same cost as an entry-level HF rig. Based on current progress and the pace at which QO100 was implemented, we could see future GEO become reality within the next 4 to 5 years.
The Hubble Space Telescope, which has radically changed our understanding of the universe for more than 3 decades, is nearing the end of its mission. Due to atmospheric drag, its orbit is steadily decreasing, threatening to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. According to new calculations presented at a meeting of the American Astronomical Society, this could happen as early as 2033, and in a pessimistic scenario, even as early as 2029. Launched in 1990, at an altitude of about 579 kilometers, the Space Telescope has fallen more than 50 kilometers over the years of its service. Although NASA periodically adjusted the observatory's orbit, the main factor is atmospheric drag. The density of the upper layers of the atmosphere varies depending on the activity of the sun. The current period of high solar activity is accelerating the fall. If the altitude falls below 400 kilometers, there will be only a year left before the final entry into the atmosphere.
In the UK, the regulator Ofcom has proposed changes in radio spectrum that would make it Europe's first country to implement the sharing of the same frequencies between 2 different technologies. The proposal looks specifically at the upper portion of the 6 GHz band, where priority usage would be given in one portion to Wi-Fi devices, such as routers, and another to mobile devices, such as cell masts. Ofcom said the move to the so-called prioritized spectrum would most directly benefit businesses, households, and the UK economy in general. The change would affect indoor and low-power Wi-Fi and any higher-power Wi-Fi under the control of an automated frequency control system as protection against interference. The regulator will be accepting comments on the proposal no later than March 20th, 2026.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJB. I mentioned previously that I would be addressing 2 issues as I do at the beginning of each year. The first are my goals for 2026. We accomplished that last week, and I hope you found that interesting or beneficial or both. The second issue was to share those contests that I have participated in over the many years. I found them to be excellent opportunities to improve your skills, garner you some new band slots, and potentially some all-time new ones. The dates that I'm referring to include state QSO parties, international DX contests, and regional DX contests. I have worked many normally difficult entities during contests and found it very easy, sometimes, to get them in my log. I have about 90 dates that I would suggest you keep in mind. However, you don't need to write them down. I have created 2 items to make it easy for you to remember. There are a list of dates and contests in both PDF and Excel format. Both files can be found at www.aj8b.com/files, and that's aj8b.com/files. Let me know if you have any questions. If you are somewhat skilled with Excel, you can create a CSV file from the Excel workbook, get it in the right format, and import it into your personal calendar. That's what I do with Gmail, and boy, it sure helps me look at upcoming contests. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, do as many other listeners have done. Drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll fix you up. So let's start off with a banner headline. Kilo Papa 5 / November Papa 3 Victor India, Deshiseo Island, makes history. At only its 4-day mark, KP5 / NP3VI has made over 10,000 QSOs on all continents. Their goal is to make over 100,000 QSOs during their 30 days on the air. Pilot and media officer N2AJ Steve Haas said, quote, "The strong start confirms that the team's innovative remote deployment approach is working well and that the global interest remains exceptionally high." End quote. Power management continues to perform better than anticipated. Battery levels remain stable overnight, and solar charging began slightly earlier than the previous day, an encouraging sign that daylight conditions are improving. Quote, as the expedition progresses, increasing solar efficiency should allow for more consistent and sustained operating periods, end quote, said Haas. Telemetry has been fully restored, giving the team excellent visibility into system performance and power reserves as the operation continues. The team has obtained valuable propagation insights, which has enabled them to fine-tune band and time-of-day strategies to maximize global reach. 20, 17, and 15 meter appear to be outperforming higher bands at this time, Haas said. Quote, this is not unusual early in a long-duration operation, and conditions are expected to evolve as solar and propagation patterns continue to change, end quote. Now I have a little more information on the KP5 here at the end. From Guinea-Bissau, which is Juliet 5, we have this. Bavarian Contest Club members will be operating Juliet 51 Alpha from the Biagos Archipelago, Guinea-Bissau, in February-March of 2026. Their radio setup includes 5 stations, amplifiers, multiple antennas covering 1.8 through 50 megahertz, and advanced logging and filtering equipment, all transported as excess baggage. They will be on CW, sideband, and FT8. The location is on the island's northern shore with an unobstructed view over water using generator power 24/7 due to lack of public electricity. Their main goal is to provide contacts from Guinea-Bissau, which is ranked as number 85 worldwide and number 53 in Asia. QSL cards and LOTW confirmations will be managed through ClubLog, OQRS, and donations are also welcome via ClubLog. From the Gambia, which is Charlie 5, we have this. Charlie 5 SP and Charlie 5 MB are QRV from Samyang, Gambia, which is Grid Square IK13PF, until March 2026. QSL cards are available via Sugar Papa 3 Papa Sierra Direct, but not through LOTW. From the Solomon Islands, which is Hotel 4, we have this. Bernard, Delta Lima 2 Golf Alpha Charlie, is now in the Solomon Islands as H44 Mike Sierra until mid-May. He departed India last Wednesday, arriving in the Solomons capital on Friday. He is renewing his Hotel 44 Mike Sierra license, which is scheduled to expire in early February. He will move to his, quote, usual QTH there tomorrow or next Wednesday. He has taken with him a hex beam that covers 20 to 6 to replace the old tribander that covered 20 through 10. He says the weather is poor, lots of rain, no sunshine. He plans to be mostly on 40 this time with a dipole 20 meters high and a palm tree near the ocean. So he should get out, and he's a great operator. From the Federated States of Micronesia, which is Victor 6, we have this. Earlier this week, after arriving on Chuk OC-011, JA1XGI Haru reports his amplifier was likely damaged during airport transport. Nevertheless, he's been active as Victor 6 Charlie United 25, operating FT8 and CW on 160, 40, 30, 20, and 15. I've not heard him yet, but he's normally got a good signal. We'll have to see what happens without the amplifier, though. So here's one I'm interested in. If you've been listening the last couple of years, you know that I desperately need Bangladesh, S21WD, as an all-time new one. So here's a project update. The Next Generation DX Club is pleased to announce a major milestone for its upcoming Bangladesh DXpedition. The call sign Sierra 21 Whiskey Delta has been officially issued for the project. The team would like to express its sincere gratitude to the Bangladesh Telecommunications Regulatory Commission for issuing the call sign specifically for the purpose of this DXpedition. We also thank our friends at the Amateur Radio Association of Bangladesh for their continued support and assistance during the licensing process. The assignment of Sierra 21 Whiskey Delta marks an important milestone and allows the project to move fully into its final preparation phase. With around 2 months remaining before departure to Bangladesh, preparations for Sugar 21 Whiskey Delta are now well advanced and underway. The team plans to operate from IOTA AS-140 at the end of March 2026, so we're only talking about 2 months. As departure is getting closer, the focus has moved from antennas to station infrastructure. Work is ongoing on power distribution, station layouts, cabling, networking, and backup concepts. Full system tests of the complete stations, including radios, amplifiers, filters, and software, are planned for the coming weeks. The DXpedition will be active for 12 days and operate on 160 through 10 meters, including 5 megahertz, which is 60 meters. using CW, sideband RTTY, and FT8. In addition, activity via the QO100 satellite is planned using CW, sideband, and FT4. So good luck to them, and I really want to get them in the log. In fact, that's kind of a day off work sick kind of a de-expedition for me. I mentioned that the KP5 de-expedition to Deschisheo was racking up record numbers and they were working all continents. If you would like to learn more about this de-expedition, check out the DX Mentor podcast and YouTube channel episodes this week. AJB and WAGEX had a great discussion with team leader Otis and P4G all about the aspects of Deschisheo, the de-expedition. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. I learned a lot, and Otis is a truly tremendous guy. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Noise, la 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 la, hinders if I were a rich man. Effective, a noise an oyster, communication. But a noisy noise an oyster more. Or said differently, when you're trying to communicate, something that the hobby of amateur radio does in spades, you'll need to deal with a phenomenon called noise. This noise comes in different forms, but the effect is the erection of barriers to successful communication. We refer to the impact of noise as a signal-to-noise ratio, or SNR, the signal being the desired information, the noise the undesired interference. Expressed in decibels so you can deal with a massive range using a small number, an SNR greater than 0 dB means that the signal is stronger than the noise. Building a shack requires that you consider noise in many forms. If you've been a radio amateur for a few moments, your mind is likely to head straight for the hiss, crackle and pop you might hear whilst attempting to communicate on HF. But there's a few other things to discuss. There's all sorts of electronic noise received by your radio. In addition, there's audio noise picked up by your ears and often your microphone. Then there's the noise that you produce, either from your transmitter into the rest of the building, or from your mouth or speakers into the ears of the people you share the space with. Starting with audio, having a space that you can close the door on is a good way to limit the noise coming into and leaving your shack. An alternative is to wear headphones and generate text-to-speech, or pre-record your voice, ready for a contact, potentially ideal for contesting, not so much for free-form discussion. Another consideration is audio from other radios, including those tuned to a local broadcaster or aviation frequencies. In other words, if you're transmitting with a microphone, make sure that there's no other audio coming through. In some cases, it's even illegal to transmit that audio, but in all cases, it's noise that makes communication more difficult. This kind of audio noise mitigation is pretty straightforward. In stark contrast, achieving the same with electronic noise is pretty much a balancing act between budget and effectiveness. The impact of noise is inversely proportional to distance. Essentially, the closer it is, the more impact it has. With that in mind, when you start dealing with noise, start nearby and work your way out. As you eliminate the nearby noise, other sources will become apparent. Without turning this into a noise mitigation class, the process is essentially one of elimination. First locate the noise source, then eliminate it. That's easier said than done. For example, if the noise source is a power supply sitting on your bench, you can turn it off, except if that power supply is the one powering your radio. So perhaps I should say, attempt to eliminate it instead. There's plenty of ways to have a go at this, and volumetric kilotons of content published on the subject, some of it even useful. In many but not all cases, noise is an electrical phenomenon that enters via any means possible, and you'll need to attempt noise mitigation at multiple points of entry. Obvious sources are the power supply, coax and the antenna connection, the speaker cable, the microphone lead, and if you're using a computer, the USB serial or Ethernet cable, and within the computer itself, each requiring different approaches. The obvious one is to disable the noise, that is, turn off the offending device. As I said, that might not be an option, but you can replace noisy gear or place it further away. There's isolation, using tools like ferrites and chokes to stop the noise from reaching your radio. Often in the form of a clip-on blob, you'll find these on things like monitor and USB cables. Place the ferrite as close as possible to the input of your radio. If it's loose on the cable, wind it through the ferrite. The tighter, the better. There's software solutions with varying levels of effectiveness. You'll find DSP or digital signal processing knobs and buttons on many radios. They're generally helpful for narrowband repeating noises, like the hum of an electric motor or power supply. There's tools that attempt to impose a noise on your signal that cancels out the noise, anti-noise, if you like, by receiving the noise, inverting it and adding it to your signal, thus, at least theoretically, eliminating it. Noise minus noise is silence. This can take the form of a device for noise coming in from the antenna, but it also applies to things like noise-cancelling speakers. In audio, this is called active noise cancelling. There's also a new crop of noise-cancelling software using AI or assumed intelligence that captures your signal, attempts to figure out what's noise and what's not, removes the noise and then feeds it back to you. Your mileage may vary, and if you break it, you get to keep both parts. Consider your privacy and security implications of sending your audio out the door to be processed. That's not to say that, at least theoretically, effective local machine learning models could be created to help with this. I've yet to see one. At some point, you'll hopefully reach a place where the noise inside your shack is no longer an issue. Then you'll discover your noisy neighbours with solar panel inverters, pool pumps, plasma televisions, broadband modems, kids' toys and pretty much anything electronic, purchased with no consideration whatsoever in relation to your hobby. I'm mentioning this because more often than not you'll have little or no control of those devices. You could cultivate your relationship with your neighbours and discuss your situation, but don't expect compliant hardware to magically solve all your issues. Antenna orientation, horizontal versus vertical, might assist, as might placement or distance from the noise source. It's why I suggested you start this journey with simple antennas, with plenty of room for evaluation and modification to suit the conditions. All this to point out that once you have the perfect shack, your work is only just beginning. But then I suspect that you already realize this. Like antennas, I will note that noise and its elimination is an integral part of this hobby. It's easy to forget that whilst you're in the middle of a frustrating hunt for a noise source, and if you like, you can think of it as ripples or waves on the pond whilst you're casting a fly. When you discuss this with other amateurs, you'll likely come across terms like QRM, Quebec Romeo Mike, and QRN, Quebec Romeo November, the last letter describing either man-made or natural noise. I'm not sure how helpful the distinction is, but it's there if you need it. One resource worth mentioning is a website called qrm.guru, Quebec Romeo Mike .Golf Uniform Romeo Uniform. It has documented processes and tools to discover where noise is coming from and how to go about dealing with it. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The Federal Communications Commission has approved Starlink's plans to deploy an additional 7,500 of its second-generation satellites to comprise a 15,000-satellite constellation. President Trump is restoring America's technological leadership, explained the FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. The FCC authorization is a game-changer for enabling the next-generation service. By authorizing 15,000 new and advanced satellites, the FCC has given SpaceX the green light to deliver unprecedented satellite broadband capabilities, strengthen competition, and help ensure that no community is left behind. SpaceX's Starlink fleet is close to approaching the milestone of 10,000 active satellites in its constellation, which today serves 9.2 million customers. Starlink has also received a time-limited waiver to operate its network at a higher power level to increase speed, while FCC updates its rules on limits to what it calls equivalent power flux density. During the public comment period preceding the FCC's decision, rivals such as Viasat, Globalstar, and Blue Origin voiced their concerns that the Commission was empowering a monopoly. This proposed expansion of SpaceX's operating authority would give SpaceX an even greater ability and incentive to foreclose other operators from accessing and using the limited orbital and spectrum resource. In its own letter to the Commission, Globalstar wrote that SpaceX's failure in the September application to provide a legitimate inference analysis is not surprising. In its 2025 report, Starlink announced it had passed 600 terabits per second in network capacity. This will expand the constellation launch of its V3 satellites, promised to provide 10 times the downlink and 24 times the uplink capacity compared to the V2, doubling its subscriber base from the year prior. Meanwhile, Kyivstar has launched Starlink's direct-to-cell satellite connectivity service for its customers in the Ukraine. Veon's subsidiary Kyivstar confirmed that the service will enable the carrier to bolster connectivity. In doing so, the Ukraine becomes the first European country to switch on Starlink's direct-to-cell service.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The Supreme Court in the United States has decided to hear a case that puts the FCC's entire system for imposing fines under constitutional scrutiny, and could dramatically redefine how the agency enforces rules on pirate radio, emergency alert system compliance, and broadcast operations. At issue is whether the Communication Act allows the FCC to levy civil penalties without first providing a jury trial in an Article III court. FCC versus AT&T follows a Fifth Circuit ruling that vacated a $57 million fine against the communications giant, finding the Commission's internal forfeiture process unconstitutional under the Seventh Amendment and Article III, even though companies can later challenge unpaid fines in federal court. Meanwhile, President Trump first threw his support behind the bill that would require an AM radio in passenger vehicles when he took the stage at the 2024 National Religious Broadcasters International Christian Media Convention. "I will do my part to protect AM radio in cars," Trump told Christian broadcasters at the time. Now, the president is recommitting to that pledge. "I like the AM in every car bill," Mr. Trump said a few days past in an interview with Salem Radio Network's Hugh Hewitt. "I am in favor of it." It's interesting. A lot of people don't know about that. But it's actually a very big subject, a huge deal, and we're going to do something on that. During his earlier appearance at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, Trump acknowledged that AM radio was a critical outlet for his base.
Hello, and welcome to the next chapter in a new series here on This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, TWIAR's historian. From the most interesting mind of Philip Nedlinger, KA4KOE, comes Dead Electrical Dudes, in which he makes a fascinating and humorous look at the movers and shakers that helped kindle our amateur radio hobby and other radio-related stuff. Philip has presented these dudes on EHAM over the last several years and has kindly granted us permission to use his materials here on TWIAR. And so we continue with Dead Electrical Dudes number 4. This chapter's stiff, Guglielmo Marconi. Entered mortal coil 25 April 1874. Assumed room temperature 20 July 1937. Now, in Philip's esteemed opinion, if you haven't heard of Guglielmo Marconi, then you should mail forthwith your amateur radio license back to the Friendly Cookie Company, FCC, with a letter of contrite apology addressed to the Honorable Mr. Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH. At the very best, you may be spared an encounter with the dreaded Wolfhong, a terrible tool used for dealing out punishment to poor amateur radio operators. To put it simply, Marconi fielded the first practical radio communications system. GM's investigations were spurred on by the news of the success of Heinrich Hertz's experiments proving the existence of radio waves as predicted mathematically by James Clerk Maxwell. GM began his experiments in Pontecchio, Italy, on his rich daddy's estate in 1895, aided by his brother. Marconi's DX was an astounding 1.5 miles, a feat rarely accomplished by the memorable Radio Shack CB Channel 14 100 milliwatt walkie-talkies sold to hapless young waifs more than a half-century later, powered by the ubiquitous 9-volt rectangular battery, great for tingling your tongue. By the way, neat trick to try on little kids. Evil grin. Heady stuff this was. Marconi determined that if he grounded his radio apparatus, performance was dramatically improved. Imagine that. Further experiments and improvements extended the range to 12 miles by 1900 under the auspices of the newly formed Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company Limited. Over the course of 5 years, the maestro increased the range of his gadget a phenomenal 10.5 miles. How many of you can match this feat of engineering? In 1901, Marconi finally got his act together and transmitted the letter S in Morse code between Poldhu, Cornwall, England, and Newfoundland, a distance of 2,100 miles. Note that the transmitter utilized was a spark gap type. If you've ever seen a high-power spark transmitter in operation, it is a treat, since the massive static discharges are spectacular. A little-known fact is that the letter S did was used, as the transmitter would have been damaged by the longer arc duty cycle encountered by sending DAS. GM carried on with further radio commercial ventures that were a financial success. David Sarnoff, who would later become the head of RCA, started out working for Marconi's company. Did you know that in the early days of Sarnoff's career, he delivered flowers to Marconi's many mistresses? Talk about pleasing the boss. Philip Nedlinger, KA4KOE. With thanks to Philip Nedlinger, KA4KOE, for allowing us to use his materials, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellites, or GOES, program started a revolution in meteorology and weather forecasting. With GOES-1, satellite-sourced weather data could be sourced without waiting for the satellite to pass overhead. Previous satellites could only provide data at the times they were passing overhead. The first 3 GOES satellites carried an instrument called Visible and Infrared Span-Scan Radiometer. This instrument enabled meteorologists to collect a wider range of data as well as a fuller set of data than ever before. GOES-1 went up in 1974, with the next 2 arriving in the next 5 years. The second generation of GOES satellites added important weather observation instruments. With these, our understanding of phenomena such as El Niño and tropical storms improved greatly. Furthermore, beginning with GOES-7, an RF receiver was added as part of the Search and Rescue Satellite-Aided Tracking System. From 1994 to 2001, the third generation GOES satellites reached orbit. Innovations included the ability to narrow the area under observation to better understand local weather events. GOES 12 also included the Solar X-ray Imager instrument, which added a full disk X-ray observation of the Sun to the toolkit of space weather watchers. Generation 4 satellites, called GOES-N, ushered in improvements to positioning with star tracker instruments. With these, the location of weather events could be more precisely determined. The extreme ultraviolet sensor added to space weather observations. Scan rates were quickened to 1-minute scans, which aided in understanding severe weather outbreaks and issuing warnings. The current generation of GOES satellites, known as GOES-R, added a variety of capabilities. These satellites feature the ability to narrow in and zoom out from local to global views with a choice of scan rates. Fire detection instruments were added for the first time ever on a geostationary satellite. Many hobbyists enjoy receiving direct L-band downlinks from these satellites.
If you're visiting the Orlando Hamcation Fairgrounds between the 13th and 15th of February, and you're bringing along an APRS-enabled device, tune it to 147.585 MHz using a path of temp1-1. That will get you into the digipeater being set up by the Daytona Beach Amateur Radio Association, enabling you to connect with others at Hamcation, sending and receiving messages. The Daytona Group is sponsoring the digipeater activity and calling it APRS Day Out, allowing radio operators to practice the kind of networking skills that would come in handy during events like Hamcation or during a crisis. Once you're connected, your first message should, of course, be CQ, to let everyone know you've arrived on the network.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. If you're thinking about making some satellite contacts and have never done it, this can be overwhelming. How do you find out what satellite you can use? How do you find out where the satellite is? How do you know the frequencies to transmit and receive? Start by visiting AMSAT.org. Once there, you'll want to look at the options on the Satellite Resources tab. I would start with the Frequencies tab, and then FM satellites and live FM satellites. The FM satellites will be easiest for beginners. Write down the transmit and receive frequencies for the ISS and SO50. Once you make some contacts on these two satellites, you can give some of the other FM satellites a try. Next, click on Current Satellite Status on the same Satellite Resources tab. Look for the ISS and SO50. And you want to see if they have blue highlighted boxes. This means the satellite has been heard and is operational. Now, where is the satellite in relationship to your location? Click on TLEs and Past Prediction Tools. Also under the Satellite Resources tab, click on AMSAT Satellite Prediction Tools. Select the satellite you want past predictions for, enter your lat long, and the tool will tell you the next passes for that particular satellite. This should get you started with what satellite to try, what frequencies, and where it is. Now it is up to you to point your antenna in the correct direction with your radio tuned and listen. This is the important part. Do not transmit unless you hear someone on the satellite. The reason is you may not have the correct Doppler correction for the downlink frequency and not hearing everyone. You would transmit and others will hear you and come back to you, but you're not hearing them. Thus, you could be the cause of unintentional QRM. Once you hear the satellite, transmit. I would suggest listening, hearing a call, and calling that person. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at the solar weather forecast and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity reached moderate levels with 2 M-class flares earlier this week. The first flares occurred on January 21st in regions 4345 and 4349. Region 4345 continued to show development as well as region 4342. Region 4341 was a main contributor to the sea level activity of the day, including a large C-class flare which occurred on January 21st. A new active region is rotating into the visible disk from the southeast limb and produced a C5.2 flare on January 21st. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed in the available coronagraph imagery. Solar activity is likely to be at moderate levels with a slight chance for X-class strong flares on January 22nd through the 24th, primarily due to the magnetic potential of regions 4341, 42, and 45. Solar wind parameters reflected coronal mass ejection influence transitioning into a high-speed stream paradigm, with the interplanetary magnetic field returned to largely enhanced background levels. Solar wind speeds gradually decreased from about 800 km per second to 575 km per second at the end of the day. Phi angle remained in the positive solar sector away from the Sun, indicating the coronal hole high-speed stream dominant influence over the period. Solar wind parameters near Earth are expected to be dominated by the coronal hole high-speed stream conditions. Geomagnetic field activity is likely to reach minor geomagnetic storm levels on January 29th and unsettled to active levels on January 27th and 28th, then again on the 30th and 31st, and then one more time from February 4th through the 11th. All enhancements in activity are due to the anticipated influence of multiple recurrent coronal hole high-speed streams. The remainder of the outlook period is expected to be mostly quiet. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read A Quick Guide to HF Propagation Using Solar Indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOACAP Online for Ham Radio website.
2026 Winter Field Day, organized by the Winter Field Day Association, begins at 1600 UTC on Saturday, January 24th. That's 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and ends at 2159 UTC on Sunday, January 25th, 4:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The 30-hour annual event encourages amateur radio operators to practice and improve their skills and preparedness during any kind of disaster. Stations may begin setting up no earlier than 1600 UTC, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Friday, but cumulative setup time shall not exceed 12 hours. All amateur bands may be used except for 12, 17, 30, and 60 meters, and all modes may be used except WSJT modes. There will also be transmissions from the Winter Field Day Bulletin from 3 U.S. states, Alabama, Wisconsin, and California, and Ireland, using various modes, times, and frequencies. Get the completed rules at winterfieldday.org. Just ahead in radio sport this week, January 23rd through the 25th, the CQ 160-meter contest, that's CW. The REF contest, that's CW as well. The Bardig Riddy Sprint contest, that's digital. January 24th through the 25th as well. Winter Field Day, CW, phone and digital. January 25th and 26th, the Australia Day contest, CW, phone and digital. And on January 28th, SKCC Sprint, that is CW. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, January 30th through the 31st, the Jackson MS Capital City Hamfest, ARRL Mississippi State Convention, that's in Jackson, Mississippi. February 7th, the Hendricks County Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Indiana Section Convention, that's in Danville, Indiana. And February 13th through the 15th, the Orlando Hamcation, hosting the ARRL Southeastern Division Convention in Orlando, Florida.
John Cadwallader, Canode. November 4, Mike, Silent Key of Boyce, Virginia, passed away on January 13th, 2026. He was 88 years old. John Ross, Kilo Delta 8, India Delta Juliet, is here with more.
First licensed in 1952, Canode served on the ARRL Board of Directors for 21 years, first as Roanoke Division Vice Director, then Director and Vice President. He was a member of the ARRL Maxim Society President's Class, a life member, and was named ARRL Honorary Vice Director in 2023. A remembrance from his hometown radio club, the Shenandoah Valley Amateur Radio Club, of which he was a founding member, notes that Kinode made hundreds of thousands of contacts in his lifetime, earning nearly every top award available to amateur radio operators from every nation in the world. He obtained the DXCC Honor Roll, the DXCC Challenge Award, the CQ-DX Hall of Fame in 2000, and in 2025 he earned the latest ARRL award, the DXCC Trident. A memorial service will be held at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, January 27, 2026, at the Enders and Shirley Funeral Home Chapel in Berryville, Virginia. Special thanks to Elizabeth Cottrell, W4EHC, and the Shenandoah Valley Amateur Radio Club for information including in this memorial. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
In 1984, Kinode received the ARRL Roanoke Division Special Service Award. He also served as manager of the W4K4N4 ARRL QSL Bureau, and as a volunteer examiner, he had 223 VE sessions to his credit. He was a member of the Quarter Century Wireless Association, AMSAT, the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, the International DX Association, or INDEXA, and the International Radio Club of America. He also belonged to the North Shenandoah DX Association, the National Capital DX Association, and the Potomac Valley Radio Club. Kinode served in the U.S. Air Force and worked several years with Sandia Corporation in New Mexico, retiring from IBM in 1993.
An Arizona radio amateur has issued a call asking fellow hams to turn their efforts toward making digital mode software such as WSJTX more accessible to sight-impaired hams. Software builders and tinkerers are being sent a special message from NU7I on behalf of radio operators like him who are blind or have low vision, keeping them from enjoying some digital modes. One of the gifts that Darrell, NU7I, has provided to users of contemporary technology is his blog, Blind Access Journal. As an advocate for people who are blind, like Darrell, or perhaps challenged by low vision or obstacles posed by aging, he has developed his blog to provide resources to developers, decision-makers, and other consumers of technology so they can make the modern world more accessible to everyone. Darrell says that the increasing popularity of digital modes has made it harder for hams with disabilities to participate fully because an accessible user interface is missing from the software. He said that because WSJTX is open source, it provides an opportunity for collaboration for improvements in keyboard navigation, screen reader support, and overall usability. He hopes his blog can be a place where advocates, developers, and users can brainstorm. To volunteer or simply to learn more, contact Darrell on this email, editor@blindaccessjournal.com.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
A group of petitioners continues to seek authorization of high-frequency financial data trading in the shortwave radio bands. The Shortwave Modernization Coalition is pressing the FCC for an answer to its petition, which was filed in the spring of 2023. The group is seeking the authorization to transmit on the bands between 2 MHz and 25 MHz under Part 90 of the FCC rules. A number of the bands being sought either include or are adjacent to amateur radio bands. The coalition's original filing drew substantial opposition from amateur radio operators and the ARRL, citing the potential for interference. The ARRL said that in 2024, the IARU's monitoring system detected what was believed to be HF trading interference on the amateur portion of 20 meters. The U.S. Coast Guard also objected to the petition, saying additional traffic would raise the noise floor for everyone. The proposed Part 90 authorization differs from traditional international HF broadcasts governed under the Part 73 rules. Those rules were utilized last year by 3 firms with ties to financial trading to obtain station grants. However, the FCC restricted those stations to broadcast operations, likely prompting trading firms to view the pending Part 90 petition as their only remaining path to secure spectrum for dedicated non-voice data. The SMC's petition has been pending since 2023, and based on the tenor of its latest FCC filing, it is growing anxious for some sort of answer from the Commission. A radio engineer from the 1920s could take a shortwave radio from the 1920s and transmit and receive voice signals today, the SMC wrote in a cost-benefit analysis filed to the FCC after a December meeting with the Commission. It is remarkable how little innovation has occurred in this band. The coalition is made up of 7 financial trading firms that ensure there is always a buyer or seller available for stocks and other financial products. Right now, SMC member experimental HF transmissions operate under Part 5 of the Commission's rules. The licensees are not permitted to provide commercial service, charge fees, or receive payments for products or services of the operation. Absent communications in the 2 through 25 megahertz band, the SMC members would lose what has been demonstrated to be an extremely efficient and beneficial method of delivering data over long distances, the coalition wrote in its December filing. Granting Part 90 non-voice licenses would simply allow current experimental licensees to continue their operations that have existed without formal complaints or interference, it said. Moreover, the coalition believes the HF bands should be brought into the current practice of spectrum regulation, with the flexible use approach that the FCC has used to manage other bands. New technology through software-defined systems, the coalition said, has been engineered to find open channels without impacting existing spectrum users. This vital feature of how the band has been utilized means that any harmful interference with active federal users should not be a concern, the coalition wrote. Of course, not all current users of the shortwave spectrum agree with that assertion. 9 Part 90 bands are immediately adjacent or overlap amateur bands. The Coast Guard, meanwhile, worries that the overall noise floor in the 2 through 25 megahertz band will increase due to increased usage in the band. In the ARRL's opposition document, which was filed in August of 2023, the association argued that it would not be possible to identify Part 90 stations responsible for interference without periodic station identification using an open and known protocol required for that purpose. The International Amateur Radio Union's monitoring system, which monitors the amateur bands to identify transmissions sent by intruders, captured what is believed to be high-frequency trading in 2024, occurring in the portion of the 20-meter amateur radio band from 14347.5 through 14350 kilohertz. The ARRL also noted that experimental transmissions occurred at unknown times and changing frequencies, making interference sources difficult to track down. The SMC's petition also seeks a power increase for Part 90 operation in the 2 through 25 megahertz band, resulting in a maximum transmitter power of 20 kilowatts. But the ARRL noted that compared to the current authorization of 1,000 watts peak envelope power for the Part 90 operations that do exist in the HF bands, that constitutes an increase of at least 13 dB, creating a much greater potential for interference. The ARRL also believed that the SMC's analysis was flawed by considering only ionospheric propagation and not ground wave interference, and using noise floor baselines that consider only residential noise levels, ignoring the lower noise floor of rural environments. Their equipment must also be able to transmit and receive on any assigned frequency in the band and capable of immediately changing frequency. SMC member companies stated their experimental stations have already been operating in such a manner. Ultimately, SMC seeks the grant of its petition and initiation of rulemaking process.
Former FCC official John B. Johnson, Whiskey 3 Bravo Echo of Darewood, Maryland, passed away on January 7, 2026. He was 98 years old. Born in Zanesville, Ohio, Johnson was a World War II veteran and served in the Pacific Theater. He was first licensed on March 15, 1954, as Kilo November 2, Hotel Romeo. Following military service in college, he worked for the General Electric Company and then as an engineer for the Federal Communications Commission. He retired in 1998 as branch chief in the Private Radio Bureau, specializing in the amateur radio service. ARRL Radio Sport and Regulatory Information Manager Bart Janke, Whiskey 9 Juliet, reflected on his passing, saying, "Johnny was heavily involved in the changing landscape of FCC regulations, including the implementation of the volunteer examiner system and no-code amateur radio licenses. He would attend the annual National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators meetings, bringing key FCC staff from D.C. and Gettysburg to support our work, and later volunteering for them and its question pool committee after his retirement. Johnson often participated in the FCC Forum at Dayton Hamvention and was honored as Hamvention Ham of the Year in 1991. He held several roles for the Quarter Century Wireless Association, including president from 2004 to 2008. Johnson also authored articles for several radio publications, including QST, and was an ARRL Charter Life member.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over. We begin with a few stories from NASA. First, NASA's SpaceX Crew 11 mission safely splashed down early Thursday morning in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego, concluding a more than 5-month mission aboard the International Space Station. Crew 11 returned home about a month earlier than planned because of a medical concern teams are monitoring with one of the crew members, who remains stable. Next, if everything has gone to plan, the rollout of NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft for the Artemis II mission around the moon commenced about 12 hours prior to publication on Saturday, January 17th at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The Artemis II launch window opens as early as February 6th. And NASA, along with the U.S. Department of Energy, announced on Tuesday, January 13th, a renewed commitment to their long-standing partnership to support the research and development of a fission surface power system for use on the moon under the Artemis campaign and future NASA missions to Mars. And finally, AMSAT EA's latest pocket cube, Hades SA, known as Spinny One, has been coordinated by the International Amateur Radio Union. A 1.5 Pocket Cube Hades SA Spinny One is a satellite operated by AMSAT EA members to promote the use of Codec 2 voice and SSDV in satellite communications, both of which are open protocols. As secondary objectives, the satellite is also intended to test its Doppler resistance modem and a new antenna deployment mechanism. The satellite includes a BBS that allows amateurs to send text messages and optionally upload Codec 2 recordings for transmission by the satellite. A sample Codec 2 transmission has been pre-recorded in flash memory until new transmissions from Earth arrive. Hades SA Spinny One includes a digital camera provided along with its dedicated software by the UK-based company Spinning Around. The camera will capture images of the deployment mechanism, which includes a small commemorative plaque as well as whatever lies within its field of view at that moment. Every 3 days, a new picture will be taken and transmitted to the ground using the SSDV protocol. Image transmissions will occur continuously every few minutes so that stations worldwide can receive the frames. In the event of a camera failure, an internally stored image will be transmitted instead. Tools and detailed instructions on how to use them will be published on the AMSAT EA website. The satellite is scheduled to launch on the SpaceX Transporter 16 mission approximately March 14th, 2026.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
Nominations are now being accepted for the 2026 Dayton Hamvention Awards. Awards include Technical Achievement, Special Achievement, Amateur Radio Operator of the Year, and Amateur Radio Club of the Year. Nomination forms can be found at hamvention.org. The nomination process will close February 10th. An awards ceremony will take place on Saturday, May 16th, with winners announced on the website and at a celebration event. This year's Hamvention runs May 15th through the 17th at the Greene County Fair and Expo Center in Xenia, Ohio.
The Amateur Radio on the International Space Station program is seeking formal and informal education institutions and organizations, individually or working together, to host an amateur radio contact with a crew member on board the ISS. ARIS anticipates that the contact would be held between July 1st, 2026 and December 31st, 2026. Crew scheduling and ISS orbits will determine the exact contact dates. To maximize these radio contact opportunities, ARIS is looking for organizations that will draw large numbers of participants and integrate the contact into a well-developed education plan. The deadline to submit a proposal is February 27, 2026. Proposal information and more details, such as expectations, proposal guidelines, and the proposal form, can be found at www.aris.org. An informational webinar session will be held on February 5, 2026 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Crew members aboard the International Space Station will participate in scheduled amateur radio contacts. These radio contacts are approximately 10 minutes in length and allow students to interact with the astronauts through a question and answer session. An ARIS contact is a voice-only communication opportunity via amateur radio between astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the space station and classrooms and communities. ARIS contacts afford education audiences the opportunity to learn firsthand from astronauts what it is like to live and work in space, and to learn about space research conducted on the ISS. Students also will have an opportunity to learn about satellite communication, wireless technology, and radio science. Because of the nature of human spaceflight and the complexity of scheduling activities aboard the ISS, organizations must demonstrate flexibility to accommodate changes in dates and times of the radio contact. Amateur radio organizations around the world, with the support of NASA and space agencies in Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe, present educational organizations with this opportunity. The ham radio organization's volunteer efforts provide the equipment and operational support to enable communication between crew on the ISS and students around the world using amateur radio. Please direct any questions to education@ariss-usa.org.
DX Looked has released a new vocab view that makes professional-grade HF propagation predictions accessible to amateur radio operators for the very first time, without requiring technical expertise or specialized software. VOCAP, the Voice of America Coverage Analysis Program, is the gold standard for HF propagation prediction, originally developed by the U.S. government for international broadcasting. It uses sophisticated ionospheric modeling to predict which frequencies will work between any 2 points on Earth, based on solar activity, time of day, and seasonal variations. Until now, using VOCAP required command line tools and configuration files that put it out of reach for most hams. What makes DX Look's approach unique is how the VOCAP data is presented, using the same visual language as DX Look's reports view. If you already understand how reports works, you will understand VOCAP immediately. It presents the same colored arc showing propagation paths, same band indicators, same signal quality visualization. Zero learning curve. This release marks a significant evolution for DX Look as a platform. Until now, DX Look has focused on displaying real observed propagation data from sources like PSK Reporter, RBN, and WSPRnet. With the new VOCAP view, DX Look adds the capability to display predictions alongside that real data, giving operators both what's happening and what's expected to happen. The VOCAP view is driven by real-time solar data, automatically adjusting predictions based on current smooth sunspot numbers. Predictions update hourly and cover all HF amateur bands from 80 through 10 meters. The VOCAP view is now live and available to all users at dxlook.com. DX Look is a real-time HF and VHF propagation visualization platform built by amateur radio operators for the amateur radio community. It combines live reception reports, space weather data, physics-based modeling, and professional-grade vocab predictions to help operators understand both current band conditions and expected propagation behavior worldwide.
AMSAT is offering a limited-time promotion for new and renewing members that includes a free digital copy of Getting Started with Amateur Satellite. The promotion is being offered as AMSAT begins its 2026 membership year. Anyone who joins or renews their AMSAT membership during the promotional period will receive a download link for the latest edition of Getting Started with Amateur Satellites in their membership confirmation email. The guide is designed to help amateur radios understand the fundamentals of satellite operation and serves as a practical reference for both newcomers and operators returning to the hobby. Additional information about AMSAT membership is available at https://launch.amsat.org. In addition to this limited-time promotion, AMSAT membership includes a subscription to the AMSAT Journal, access to archived issues, discounts on selected items in the AMSAT online store, and opportunities to participate in AMSAT elections, committees, awards program, and other AMSAT activities and programs. Members may also have access to archived proceedings from the past AMSAT Space Symposium through the AMSAT member portal. Beyond these tangible benefits, AMSAT membership supports the development, launch, and operation of amateur radio satellites, along with education and outreach efforts. Joining AMSAT is just not about individual benefits, though. It's about being part of the community that builds and operates amateur satellites for radio amateurs worldwide. As AMSAT looks ahead to the 2026 season, the promotion helps launch another year of growth and opportunity for amateur radio in space.
Competitors and volunteers are getting ready for the 2026 World Radio Sport Team Championship in July, but organizers are also looking a bit further down the road to 2030. A competition of sorts is taking place among would-be hosts for the 2030 World Radio Sport Team Championship, and the organization's sanctioning committee has set a deadline of February 15th to receive letters of intent. The letters should include the proposed time frame and location, the estimated budget with fundraising plan, and identify the officers and organizing committee. Letters of intent or questions about the host selection process should be sent to Doug, K1DG, at gmail.com. The committee would like to announce the next host during the closing ceremony of WRTC 2026 in July in the United Kingdom.
A Chinese national has been sentenced to 3 years in prison for damaging an undersea cable connecting Taiwan's main island and the Penghu Islands in the Taiwan Strait. The man was the captain of the Tongolese-registered vessel Hong Tai 58. The Tanin District Court's verdict marks the first sentencing after reports in recent years of undersea cables around Taiwan being severed. Taipei has accused Beijing of sabotaging its cables, describing it as a gray zone tactic to pressure the self-ruled island, which China claims as its territory. Taiwan has 10 domestic and 14 international undersea cables. In Taiwan, a nonprofit civil defense group, Ganggu, has started training people on how to communicate using amateur radio if the internet is unavailable.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
And our final story this week, through the years, amateur radio operators have become as much a fixture at one of India's major religious gatherings as the thousands of pilgrims themselves. The Gangasagar Mela, the week-long Hindu pilgrimage that takes place each January, where the Bay of Bengal meets the Ganges River, is a sacred time for millions throughout India. The crowd size makes it a perilous time as well. A man suffered a stroke, a toddler became separated in the crowd from her mother, and the father of a teenager nearly drowned, according to news reports. Members of the West Bengal Radio Club, who have been a steady presence at the Mela for many years, are deployed with their radios into the crowd, connecting with the central hub. A trio of radio operators shared a photo of the 3-year-old with others and reached out to an amateur radio operator in the family's hometown in Bangladesh for additional information. In another instance, a teenage girl said her father had not returned from his visit to the shore of the island, prompting the hams to conduct a search. They got in touch with the on-site health center and learned that he had been transported there after nearly drowning earlier in the day in the shallow waters surrounding the island. The hams were also able to reassure the family of a 64-year-old stroke patient. They contacted his family to let them know he required medical assistance and had been airlifted to Kolkata for treatment.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the Internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to W2XBS77@gmail.com.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.